Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a subscriber, I guess he's a subscriber, he's a viewer at least, make a statement, kind of get in an argument with me in the comments, and this is something I see a lot in the training world. I see it a lot in the training world, particularly around the physique and bodybuilding world. And that's this idea that guys are like, I got stronger on certain lifts, but some of the primary movers involved got smaller. They shrank, and it's visible. I took pictures. I can tell they're smaller. I lost muscle. And in this case, the guy is saying, well, I quit doing a lot of the extra curling I was doing. I was doing lots of cable concentration curls with slow negatives and everything else. And I went over to just mostly compound lifts, and I added 50 pounds to my weighted chin-ups. But my biceps got smaller, and I know they got smaller. They look smaller. I could see in the mirror. I've got photos. And I want everyone to think about this for a moment. Because when we look at any of the science of training, what's been studied in labs over the years, what's one of the things that we find? That there is no way to separate size and strength in drug-free lifters. There is no way to separate the two. In other words, if a muscle gets bigger, it will get stronger 100% of the time. 100% of the time. No exception. If a muscle gets stronger, it will almost always get bigger. The reason I say almost always, it may not get visibly bigger, but if we were to do DEXA scans or MRIs on it, you will find that it did get slightly bigger. It just might be such a microscopic amount that you don't see it. In other words, anytime you gain strength, you gain size, and anytime you gain size, you gain strength. Now, we know that different types of training can be skewed slightly more towards one than another. Meaning, if you're doing an exercise where you lift a heavier weight in general, you're focusing on heavier weight with lower reps, things like that, you usually gain more strength per unit of size, right? In other words, if you do really heavy work, like at 85% and do 7 sets of 3, to build the same amount of muscle you would do with 3 sets of 10. And yes, this has been studied specifically. This exact same identical comparison has been studied in the lab. Both groups gained the same amount of size, but the one that went a little heavier gained a little more strength. Right? So what does that tell you? It tells you that there's something else going on. There's something wrong when a person says, I gained strength, but I lost size. I mean, how did I lose size in a muscle that's one of the primary movers on these big exercises? And the argument would be it's biologically impossible. There is no answer to that biologically, meaning something is false in your statement. Either you didn't gain strength or you didn't lose size in those muscles, because it just simply isn't possible within the known science. So if we have something that's been studied ad nauseum in a lab and your real world experiences contradict that, maybe you're viewing something incorrectly. Maybe there's something wrong that you're not addressing. Biggest example, let's say we take that example with the weighted chin-up. Guy says, I got stronger. Well, it depends on how you measure strength. Is strength measured by how much weight you throw onto plates? Meaning, if you have someone who, say, lost some weight, they're cutting, and they've been doing dead hang chin-ups, and they, over time, add 50 pounds of plates for the same number of reps that they hang from a belt, but they are doing partials, meaning they're not coming all the way down, they're maybe not pulling themselves up as much. In other words, they're shortening the range of motion, and they're taking out the most difficult part of the exercise. They might have added weight, but they didn't gain strength. In other words, watch the way I'm bench pressing right here. You guys see me bench pressing? If I add 50 pounds to the bar and do that exact same range of motion, I come all the way down, pause on the chest, and lock it at the top, there's almost biologically speaking no way it is possible that my triceps and my chest would not grow from that. Right? There is no scientific model that allows for this to happen within exercise science. What happens if I don't touch my chest? Or I bounce it off my chest so hard that I'm able to add another 50 pounds. Did I get stronger? Possibly not. Or again, if I stop short, if I put a 2 board on my chest, or I stop 4 inches short of my chest, 5 inches short of my chest, like a lot of guys do, and I add weight to the bar, did I get stronger? Possibly not. The reason for that, and this is the reason I tell guys partial reps with heavier weight, don't overload the muscle. People do stuff like that and they say, well, I'm doing it to overload the muscle. If you want to overload the muscle, do the full range of motion with more weight. Doing partials doesn't make the muscle work harder. It's easier. In other words, if I were to take and do a 2-board, put a pair of boards on my chest and touch those to press off of my chest, I should be able to use more weight. Why? Because I don't have to move the weight as far. Therefore, it's easier. 2, the leverage advantage. You're moving through the stronger part of the range of motion where your bones and muscles and everything have a leverage advantage. When you have a leverage advantage, it's the same concept of a jack. When you use a jack to jack your car up, right? You're getting a leverage advantage that allows you to lift 1,500 pound end of a car with a car jack. You can't lift 1,500 pounds with one hand, but you can with a lever arm change. Well, that happens with weightlifting too. There's all sorts of levers. Your bones are levers. And when they change to different angles to where you just don't have to work as hard to move a weight, such as the lockout on a bench press, the top half of it is a lot easier. You have a leverage advantage in your arms. Your triceps, your chest don't have to work as hard. So if you do something like that, or you skip the bottom of a chin up, of course you're going to be able to add weight to it. But did you actually get stronger? No, you didn't. It's only stronger if you do the same exercise through the same range of motion with the same technique and you add weight. So a lot of times someone might do something like that and they think they got stronger, but they didn't. So we come to the other point. What else is going on? Muscle dysmorphia. And you know what? I'll give a perfect example. Anyone who's going to come in and do 15 sets for their biceps with slow negatives and cables and work every angle possible trying to bring up a muscle, I can already tell you that anyone who's attacking a muscle with that sort of mentality may be predisposed to muscle dysmorphia already. Because a person is so obsessed with building a muscle that they're willing to step outside of the known science and things that work and go to all sorts of crazy bodybuilding approaches, which involves throwing everything but the kitchen sink at a muscle. They're doing that out of desperation. Oftentimes they're doing that out of desperation, not necessarily just work ethic. They're doing anything and everything they can to make it grow because they really and truly see their biceps or their arms as small. And people who don't think this is a real deal, I've known bodybuilders. I've known bodybuilders who think that they look tiny, who are monstrous. I've had a friend here in Houston. He actually spotted me on camera once. You guys might have saw him spot me in the background. You didn't see his face, but he was a monster. He was 300 plus pounds, lean. Used an enormous amount of gear. He couldn't see it. When he wasn't at least 6 weeks out from a bodybuilding show, he was embarrassed to take his shirt off because he felt he looked tiny and fat. All right, this was a guy who was 300 pounds with visible abs still. He wasn't necessarily ripped year round, but I've seen the guy at 305 where you could actually see his abs. You could see all 6 of them. They weren't ripped, they weren't deep. Let that sink in. In his mind, he was tiny. And we see that all the time with people in this community, don't we? People who are convinced that they are tiny. And of course, on the internet, people carry it over to other people and they'll insult people who are obviously bigger than them, stronger than them. And they'll try to say, oh, they look like they don't lift, they're tiny, whatever. But that's the internet. In person, in my experience, the number of people who get into bodybuilding or obsession with physique stuff oftentimes have body image disorders. They have a body dysmorphia. They aren't capable of seeing their own gains. And it's really sad because you have people who, they develop these body image disorders, and then what happens? They develop these disorders and they work so hard and they put in all this work and they add an inch or 2 inches to a muscle, and in their mind, in the mirror, that muscle looks smaller. They can't see it. And I think that's one of the saddest parts that we see of guys who get involved in all of this. They will become so obsessed with this and they will bust their ass and work so hard, and they aren't actually able to enjoy the fruits of their labor. And isn't that's sad if you really think about it, that someone would really work hard towards something and make progress and they can't see it. The progress is completely invisible to them. And in some cases, like what could be described by this guy, he added 50 pounds to his weighted chin up. You know how hard that is to add 50 pounds to your weighted chin up? That takes a lot of work. And he thought his arms were smaller afterwards, that they were clearly smaller, visibly smaller. even though biologically that's completely impossible. That's really sad. And here's the thing that I would tell the guys, the only fix to this, if that actually happens to you and you get stronger on some big lifts and you see the muscle actually smaller in the mirror, what I'm going to recommend you do is you go get a therapist immediately. Immediately, because if you don't, you're going to be that guy who ends up dying like Rich Piana after you inject 4 grams of gear for 20 years straight and still see yourself as tiny in the mirror. You're going to be that guy. Go see a therapist before it gets out of control. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.